G'day guys, in this video we're going to be talking about the care and breeding of Gillens Monitors, Varanus gilleni, so stick around.
G'day, my name's Luke and I'm an avid reptile and amphibian keeper. On this channel you'll see DIY tutorials, care videos, herping clips and plenty of other animal related content. Please make sure to subscribe and check out what my animals and I are up to.
So these little guys, the pygmy mulga monitor, Varanus gilleni, a little Gillens monitor, have definitely become a flavour of the month, should I say, as far as small monitors are concerned in Australia. I'm pretty lucky that I've had a little bit of success breeding and keeping these guys, and I basically just want to kind of outlay what I do. It's really nothing special, but you know, maybe this video is going to help a few people out there and maybe that'll bring a bit of success to you guys as well. So first things first, this guy actually has a name. This was my first ever Gillens monitor and father to all the ones that I've produced. He's puffing his little throat up there trying to look all tough. But this is Gilbert the Gillens monitor. I don't usually name everything here, but at one point or another I did name him. Not that I really call him by it or anything. And he is, I think he's in the vicinity of probably about 6 years old now. And he's a little weapon. He's a chunky little guy, especially at the moment. He's just coming out of brumation and he's firing on all cylinders to, you know, I even caught him this morning mating with his girlfriend. So where do we want to start when we talk about keeping Gillens monitors? I suppose most people out there, you're probably going to obtain a Gillens monitor and it's probably going to be a juvenile or a hatchling. So I suppose you probably want to consider what kind of enclosure you're going to be putting an animal like that into, and you know how long it's going to take and temperatures and all that sort of stuff until you have to kind of upgrade into a bigger enclosure. And I suppose you're going to start at the beginning, right? So you're going to start with a hatchling monitor or potentially, you know, a little juvenile. Not everybody's going to be getting an adult. So probably the best size enclosure that I keep most hatchlings in, or young juvenile monitors, would probably be in the realm of something that's about 60 centimeters, either long or tall. I wouldn't go either way necessarily. Probably tall would be my preference. And at least 45 by 45 centimeters for the other dimensions on the enclosure. So about a 60, 45, 45 sort of enclosure. In that sort of space, you're going to want to deck it out with tons of logs and foliage so the little guys can feel nice and secure. Now it's a really big thing when you're talking with these little monitors. They love their secure hiding places. Even the younger Gillens monitors that I've got here, they love wedging into little bits of bark and things like that. It's where they're found in the wild, so I just try to emulate that as best as I can in captivity. As far as substrate goes, I use a mixture of things. I use eucalyptus mulch, I use sand, I use a little bit of clay. You know, I kind of mix it up a little bit. Plenty of coir peat in there as well. I just try to make a bit of a loamy soil per se. With the juveniles, it's not super important to have a deep substrate layer, but once you're talking about an adult size, I'd probably at least be kind of having about a 6-inch layer at a good part of the enclosure, just so then if they do want to bury down and lay some eggs, they've got the option to. But for juveniles, you could keep it simple and just keep a couple of centimeters along the base of the enclosure and that'd be plenty. I always have a water bowl available for these guys. I've never really seen them use it, maybe once or twice here or there, but it's just about providing the option for it to actually have them. So we've got our substrate, we've got some water bowls, we've got tons of little hides and bits and pieces in there with tons of little foliage and bark and, you know, sticks and all the good stuff that you associate with a pygmy mulga monitor. That's fantastic. Now let's talk about some heat. So as far as heat goes with these guys, don't be scared to cook them. I'm not even kidding when I say that. At times during summer, the basking spots to these guys will get up to 80 degrees Celsius, if not even a little bit more, and they will use it from time to time. They won't use it for very long periods of time, but they'll come up, energize underneath that high heat, and then run away. But I'd say in captivity, probably a safe kind of estimate of the thermal gradient inside the basking area range would be between about 60 degrees Celsius to, let's say, 75 degrees Celsius. You don't have to cook them that hot, but they can take it. You just got to be super vigilant like I am with these guys. Now, when you're talking about ambient temperatures and things throughout the day, these guys in their enclosure have an ambient temperature of probably close to about 30 degrees at any given point. 30 to maybe about 25 at the lowest. I do try to keep them pretty warm. At night, I don't provide any heat for these monitors whatsoever, so they get that ambient drop overnight. They can get nice and cool. It gets cold in the wild, it gets cold out in the desert, so these guys can handle it as well. Now, I haven't always provided UVB for my monitors, but I'm definitely doing it nowadays, and it's just, why not? You know, we can always increase our captive keeping and, you know, be able to do better for these animals, so I'm doing it with these guys. Over my juveniles, I have a coil compact fluorescent globe. It's one of the Exoterra 200s, so it's the equivalent of probably over a 10.0 desert UVB, but it is punching through some mesh, so that's why I've got such an intense bulb on those guys. And if you haven't already seen it, in the Gillens Monitor enclosure, it's a little bit hard to see here, I've actually got the ReptiSun, the Zoomed ReptiSun 10.0s inside of their enclosure. If I have a chance to, I'll put a card up the top here and show you me installing those because they're an awesome globe and I highly recommend them. You can pick them up from a lot of really specialist pet shops, like things, you know, that do with these little guys here. I wouldn't have it any other way without that sort of really high output globe above these guys nowadays, and I'm really hoping that that increases my chances of breeding these guys more successfully this year. Okay, so we've talked about the size of a juvenile's cage, but what about an adult? So as you can see, this guy's pretty small. He's not exactly a big animal, but you know what? He's so active. And that's where it really comes down to having a little bit of space. When I first set up an adult cage for these guys, it was pretty inadequate if you ask me. It definitely did the job and it proved it because they bred in there, and you know, I'll get into some stories about breeding inside that enclosure as well. But nowadays, I have these guys in an enclosure that's 120 centimeters long by 60 centimeters front to back deep, and then top to bottom in the height, it's about 55 centimeters. So that's plenty of space for a pair of these guys, and the reason that I actually made the enclosure that big is I'm hoping that I've got a little girl amongst my juveniles there, and I might be adding her to the mix once she's an appropriate size, because I want to essentially keep them as a bit of a colony, if you will. I want to try to anyway. I won't dive too much into colony keeping monitors inside this video because it, you know, pros and cons to everything, and there's a little bit of risk involved. But I think as I'm kind of graduating a little bit through my keeping experience, it's something that I personally want to give a go. So as I said earlier, that enclosure is a decent sized enclosure, and it does have a nice deep sand bed in there, and it's got a really good thermal gradient left to right in the enclosure, a really hot basking spot, and some really, really high output UVB. Alright. So we've got our enclosure sorted. We've figured all that out, and now we're going to figure out what we're going to feed these little tackers. As much food as you can potentially give them, do it. Now I say that in the kindest way. You obviously don't want to make your monitor super fat or anything like that, but at the same time, these guys, if they're burning hot, they're going to use up all that energy and all that food, and they're just going to turn it into energy while they're running around the enclosure, so you need to be able to replace that. These little guys eat so many little crickets and wood roaches. These guys are even eating the adults. There's a couple of giant mealworms here or there. I do try to kill the mealworm before I give it to them, just because I don't want the mealworm biting them at all. They also eat little pinky mice. They eat little bits of tidbit mince here and there. They also get little scrambled eggs around the place. But those kind of like more high protein meaty things are a bit more of a treat. I try to keep the bulk of their diet things like crickets and wood roaches. In particular, if a female was to lay a clutch of eggs, then that is when I'd really want to be giving her a really high protein hit afterwards, so she can try to replenish some of that weight. Alright, so we've talked about diet, we've talked about housing, we've talked about UVB and heat and all the rest of it. Let's delve a little bit into breeding these guys. Now, I've bred these guys for 3 years now, and I have to say that some years have been easier than others, and I've had some pretty good highs and some pretty good lows. So they're not exactly the easiest monitor in my experience to breed. I could breed Ackies until the day it was done. Like, they would just pop out eggs left, right and center. My Tristis were reasonably similar in that sort of circumstance. They were very predictable to the T. Whereas these guys have given me the most uphill out of any animal any Varanid that I've bred. My first season breeding these guys, I think in total I must have gotten 2 clutches where I had around 12 eggs or thereabouts in those clutches. Now something went wrong during incubation and I lost a lot of babies full term. Now whether that was due to maybe not enough oxygen flow in the tub or what, I'm not 100% certain. It's something that I'm still trying to nail down as a keeper and a breeder. But yeah, every now and then, you know, I've had issues where monitors go full term and then all of a sudden they just go belly up. It's really sad too because you cut open those little eggs and they're perfect little replicates of their parents, and it's just a very unfortunate thing. And you know, you could have 7 eggs there that look perfect right until the end and then all of a sudden there's just nothing. So I think in my first season I maybe hatched out about 5 thereabouts, and I moved them on all pretty quick, and I actually moved them all on that season. Let's fast forward into the second season. I didn't do anything special with these guys. They were still in the smaller enclosure that they were in. So the smaller enclosure was 60 centimeters long, 50 centimeters front to back, and 80 centimeters tall. And all I did was I kept spraying a little bit of water in there occasionally just to humidify the ground, and then all of a sudden I just got inundated with baby lizards. Now I don't mean that I found eggs, I mean I found actual lizards. So I remember coming into the garage one morning just doing the daily checkup routine as I usually do, and lo and behold, in the front of the glass panel I see this little tiny Gillens Monitor hanging out there. Initially I actually thought it was a garden skink that had broken into the enclosure just to try to catch a cheeky cricket, but it was a little Gillens Monitor in the front, pressed into the glass right next to where the glass kind of pinned up against the timber board that held all the dirt in place. And anyway, I freaked out. I opened up the door and not 1 but 4 Gillens Monitors dropped out onto the ground, and I quickly scooped them all up and put them into a bucket. By this stage I was freaking out because not only have I cracked 4 Gillens Monitors babies, and that's always a plus, like surprise babies are the best babies if you ask me, I managed to successfully incubate these guys inside of the enclosure. Over the next couple of days I actually ended up finding another 3 monitors that were inside of the enclosure that were hatching out at different times as well. So in total I had 7 baby Gillens Monitors incubate themselves inside of the enclosure that the parents were in. I'm not sure if anybody else has managed to do that in that sort of extent, in particular with these guys. I'm sure somebody has done it with different types of animals out there, but I was absolutely astounded that I managed to get 7 little Gillens Monitors out. I dug up all the eggs, found only 7 egg shells, so they all hatched, they're all in perfect health. And the thing that weirds me out the most, these guys could have been in there from anywhere from about 90 to 110 days of incubating, which just absolutely freaks me out. I suppose it was a testament to that original enclosure, right? I haven't been able to replicate that since, but that's how things go. I've since sold on 4 of those particular monitors to some close friends, very lucky friends indeed, so I know where they are. But in saying that, we'll crack on to the next season. So fast forward another year, I've built a new enclosure for them. They're inside the new enclosure, but not only that, I brought in a new girlfriend. So I had a friend who had a Gillens Monitor that they wanted to rehome. And lo and behold, it actually ended up being a female. I thought, you beauty, I'm always going to be in need of another girl. So I brought her home, put her in with the other 2, and she got on just like a house on fire with them. Fast forward a couple of months, she ended up dropping a clutch of 5 eggs for me. And not long after that, unfortunately, she just dropped off the perch. She refused to eat, she refused to drink, she refused to do anything. That I couldn't get any weight on her whatsoever. So whilst I had these 5 eggs, I was yet again hit with a low, where I lost another female. The original female, she didn't lay any eggs for me last year whatsoever. I think it has to do with the fact that she moved into a new enclosure, so she was a little bit freaked out by that. But you know, these things happen from time to time. So I have these eggs incubating away, and again, about 105 days I believe it was, I got some little hatchies out. Got 3 little hatchies out. So still had 2 dead in the egg that unfortunately didn't survive. And out of those 3, I had 1 perfect hatchling. Now, one of them that came out of the egg, had a big spinal kink in the middle of it, and it really wasn't going to thrive. So I unfortunately had to put the lizard down. It wasn't going to be a fair life. It was eating, but it wasn't defecating properly. It just wasn't meant to live the way that it was. I then had another one that came out 95% perfect, except he had a little tiny kink in the end of his tail. So anyway, he was thriving, and I ended up selling him for super cheap to another friend who knows me over Facebook, just as a little pet. Now we go to the one perfect lizard that I got out of that clutch. So that one perfect lizard went to Cooper. So Cooper's working with that little lizard up at his place there, and he's teaching it little tongue training techniques and all sorts, and I can't wait to see some more with him and that particular animal. So now we go on to this season and what I'm prepping to do for these guys here. Well, I gave these guys a nice solid 6 weeks with no heat whatsoever. I froze them, and it really scared me because usually I just drop the temperatures a little bit, but this year I decided to really get them nice and cold. And why did I do this? I want to increase my odds. I really want to crack these guys this year because Gillens Monitors are one of those animals that I get asked about multiple times a week. It seems like they're in short supply and really high demand. It's not necessarily an animal that I want to cash in on, so to speak, but at the same time, if there's lots of people after them, I want to be able to try to get animals out there so then there's more of them to then breed from and people can have success and share them around themselves. So I chilled these guys down for a good month, good 6 weeks, and now I've been firing them back up and slowly increasing the heat over the past couple of weeks. So when I am going to breed these guys as well, I try to keep that dirt nice and moist. Not so it's flooded or anything by any means, but I try to keep a little bit of humidity in that earth, so should that female want to bury down and lay some eggs, she's got the option to be able to hold a burrow and get those eggs right into the ground. You should always kind of have a patch in your enclosure, or if you're using a nest box, kind of like a sandcastle consistency in my opinion, so it's able to hold a form, but it's not dripping wet. If you keep the enclosure too dry, the female's got nowhere to actually lay her eggs, and she may just scatter them and then they'll desiccate very quickly, or the male might even eat them. Unfortunately, this is the way that it goes with monitors, and I've seen it in a few of my species in the past that I've kept, and the male gets a great feed, but we don't get any eggs. So as of now, I've been starting to moisten up the enclosure, starting to put a little bit of extra water in there. Not only does that bump the ambient humidity up in there, which might signal kind of the bringing of spring and some summer rains and things like that to these guys, but it'll hopefully be able to encourage the female to dig a nest. These guys are now firing on all cylinders. They're chomping so much food, it's ridiculous. I can't give it to them enough. I'm already seeing mating activity from them. This little guy's an absolute machine. He gets right into that girl and she's very receptive at the same time. So I'm so stoked to see already that the behavior in these guys is starting to happen. So hopefully this season, I will get some hatchlings out, but we'll just have to wait and see. These guys are such a perfect little first monitor, because they don't get big. Well, that's tiny. It's tinier than a bearded dragon. It's tinier than a pygmy bearded dragon. So they're a handy little monitor pet, especially for people that are living in apartments and they want all of that monitor attitude, but they want it in a tiny package. These guys are the way to go. I've kind of moved through a whole bunch of different dwarf monitors, but these guys I think are going to kick around for a long time for me because there's just something about them. They're a beautiful little species, and I feel very privileged to have 5 of my own here, and hopefully a few more this year. So I know that this has only been a little simple video, guys, but I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed all the little photos and little tidbit videos and things of different enclosures and stuff like that I've been throwing up there on the side. Guys, don't forget to check out my Teespring store. I've got these awesome reptile merchandise up there. The link will be in the description below there. Not only that, but if you want to support the show even further, if you want to, check out Patreon. The link will be in the description down below. And for a little donation monthly, you guys can get some free content over on the other side that isn't privileged to Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or anything like that. And I'll be doing live streams with Patreons only every other Sunday. So please guys, if you like the video, make sure to chuck it a like, chuck it a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more of these awesome little animals.